Tiramisu is an Italian coffee-soaked sponge cake made up of 3 layers: coffee cream, vanilla sponge, and espresso. And I believe these layers are critical in the fight for overcoming depression. 2 years ago, when I got pregnant, what I was expecting was very different to what happened in reality. All I had known was what pregnancy was supposed to be like, when in reality, at 1 month pregnant, I lost my job. At 2 months pregnant, I was homeless. At 3 months, I was in hospital with pneumonia. At 4 months, I couldn't afford to eat. At 5 months, I almost lost my parental rights. And at 6 months, I ended up single, wanting to kill myself. After my baby was born, I was rejected from getting into my chosen university for the 2nd time. I managed to get into another university, but failed the end-of-year exam. I tried to start a dessert business, but I just couldn't get my tiramisu right. The chocolate was always too runny, the sponge was too thick, the coffee flavor was too weak. Eventually, I gave up and ended up $7,000 in debt. So, after the pregnancy from hell and a string of failures, how do you think I was feeling? Pretty awful, right? Wrong. All it did was make me more driven and ambitious than ever. I decided I was not going to be defined by my failures. I learned how to channel my energy and developed the ability to turn rejection into motivation. I realized the solution to my happiness had been in front of me all along. I took my tiramisu back to the market after having persevered with a new recipe, and it sold out in 45 minutes. My hardest recipe became my best. I realized I had to tiramisu my life. The first layer in the tiramisu is connection, which I remember as the coffee cream. I was about 2 months pregnant, sitting in my car on the side of the road, wondering where I'd sleep the night. It should have been a time of glowing happiness, but I'd been staying at my boyfriend's friend's house who had just come home and told us that we had to be out. As well as physical needs, we all have psychological needs as well. Depression is a response to our needs not being met. We need to reconnect with ourselves and those around us. Now, there are 2 parts to this: being connected to yourself, i.e. knowing and believing in your core purpose, and being connected to those around us. Being connected with your core purpose can be one of the hardest things to do. One way to reconnect with who you really are is to ask yourself this: if money were no longer an issue, what would I be doing with my life? Secondly, it's about reconnecting with those around us. A study by relationship charity Relate found that in the UK alone, 1 in 10 people doesn't have a single close friend. That's an estimated 4.7 million lonely people. Social scientist Brené Brown found that being lonely can affect the length of our life expectancy, similar to smoking 15 cigarettes a day. During the COVID-19 lockdown in New Zealand, calls to mental health helplines saw an increase by 25%. During my pregnancy, I was eventually invited back to the family home, and that's when I realized that the first layer in the tiramisu is connection. I remember this as the coffee cream, because without it, it wouldn't be a tiramisu. You see, depression lies to us. It says things like, there's no point talking to anyone, nobody cares about you, you're just a burden to people. But feeling socially accepted is a basic human need. If you feel like you're not being welcomed somewhere, then find somewhere that does welcome you. And if you feel like you don't have a place anywhere, I can assure you that you do. You just haven't found it yet. The second layer in the tiramisu is mindset and perspective. I remember this as the vanilla sponge. I had a meeting with my accountant to go over the numbers for my startup. They lead me into a room with shiny glass doors and leather chairs and a big board table. And as I sit down, they start entering all my numbers into their system, and it becomes evident that my business is not viable. As I looked up at the screen, I have never felt so stupid in my life. How could I have gotten it so wrong? But almost as if I was thrown a lifeline from God, the next day, I was finally offered a place into my dream university. As I stared out my window that night, I realized failure is a mindset. You haven't failed until you have accepted failure as your reality. I decided that just because my business wasn't going to work at that time didn't mean that I'd failed. One closed door had opened another, and it just wasn't the path for me at that time. This is how I realized that the second layer in the tiramisu is mindset and perspective. I remember this as the vanilla sponge because that's what holds it all together. Now, I get it. It's easy to say, switch your mindset. I know as well as anyone, I don't expect you to hear this and instantly feel better. And likewise, changing your mindset is not something that anybody expects you to do alone. I'm fully aware that there's a school of thought that depression is actually a chemical imbalance in the brain that simply needs drugs to fix. Now, I'm not a doctor or a psychologist, so I'm only talking from my experience. But when you're that low down, antidepressants can really help to bring you up a little bit. And hopefully what I've learned will help bring you up the rest of the way and keep you there. In terms of mindset, I believe that two of the major causes of depression are a sense of failure or a sense of powerlessness. A study by the Norwegian Institute of Public Health found that young men with no history of a previous mental disorder were taking their own lives. They found that the young men had exaggerated the importance of success, thereby developing a vulnerability to failure. They found that the young men had valued their perception of success so highly that they were unable to cope with anything less. In New Zealand, success is filtered through what is known as tall poppy syndrome. It basically means that people don't like to see other people being successful. That if you are successful, then you're somehow showing off or even asking to be taken down a notch. You want to know why the suicide rates are so high in New Zealand? Because it's also a place of rampant tall poppy syndrome. A study by the University of Otago found that 57% of New Zealand business owners felt as if they'd been emotionally affected by tall poppy syndrome. The second major cause of depression is a sense of powerlessness. For example, if someone is diagnosed with a terminal illness or suffers a sexual assault. In these circumstances, it's not that the person feels that they've failed, but rather that they feel powerless. Just when I thought I was finally on the road to success, I suffered a similar event. Depression at its core is essentially giving up. It's thinking that our circumstances will never get any better no matter what we do. I had to consciously tell myself that I would not let the event determine who I was. You see, the most important power there is the power of self. I had to change the thoughts I was telling myself. When you decide that you have your own inner power is when you can truly succeed. So overcoming a sense of failure and overcoming a sense of powerlessness can both be done with a change of mindset. Finally, I learned about the third layer in the tiramisu, the espresso. One night, after a busy day, being that I have stairs at my house, I decide that I'll run up and down my stairs 10 times between each set of weights. Let me tell you, the first set was fine. I ran up, came back down, and did the weights. Second set, that was also fine. Ran up, came back down, and did the weights. But I got to about number 6, and I was so tired. I could have felt bad about myself and unfit and lazy. But then I realized, no, I'm doing fine. I had just set the bar too high for myself. I had set an unrealistic expectation. This is how I realized that the final layer in the tiramisu is unrealistic expectations. I remember this as the espresso. How does that relate to espresso? I hear you wondering. Because you can't expect to have a powerful shot of coffee in every bite. As women, we have incredible expectations placed on us, right? There's the idea of the happy pregnancy and happy family, all the while striving for career success and getting back to your pre-baby body as soon as possible. But where do these expectations come from? Well, one of the culprits is social media. A study published in the Journal of Social and Clinical Psychology found that by decreasing our social media use to just half an hour a day, we have a significantly less chance of getting depressed. What we can sometimes forget when we're looking at social media is that people always want to put their best face forward. We start to constantly make what's called upward comparisons, where essentially we start comparing our own lives to what we're seeing. And because we have so much choice and freedom in life, we feel that we should be able to design our own lives to the same high standards. One of the secrets to positive mental health truly is low expectations. One thing Oprah Winfrey said was, you can have it all, just not all at once. A little while ago, an acquaintance came around for dinner. When we asked what they'd been up to recently, they said, "Here's my card, it explains it better." I looked down at the card, and it says, author, artist, creative, musician. So I asked about the book, and it turns out the book is still being written. So I asked about the artwork, and she hasn't had an exhibition either. It turns out that she plays an instrument in the local music group. But it really got me thinking about the way that we present ourselves to the world. I had also heard of another woman who at 50 was struggling to cope with the fact that she felt as if all she'd done with her life was have children. I started to see a link between it all and came up with the word phoban to describe the sense of what I felt was missing. It's an anagram that stands for fear of being a nobody. It's this idea that we need to reach certain levels in our life and pass certain milestones before we have any true value and have finally become somebody. So, my question is this. If we constantly feel like we're not good enough, but then we get torn down when we become successful, like what happens with tall poppy syndrome, then where does that leave us? The problem is things like lack of sleep can become an issue as we lay awake trying to figure out how to get ahead or stay up trying to work harder and harder. And unfortunately, there's a definite link between lack of sleep and depression. Studies show that for every hour of lost sleep, levels of psychological distress rise by 5% per hour the next day. Ultimately, it is up to us to determine what we consider success to be and develop resilience. How do we develop resilience? One word: faith. Believing that things can and will get better. I learned that when you reconnect with yourself and others, change your mindset and perspective, and have realistic expectations, you can reclaim your own inner power and overcome depression. Tiramisu, to me, represents perseverance. It represents determination. But above all, it reminds me that failure is never the end. I'm on track to finally graduate. I finally have a house that I can call home for my child. And I'm not afraid of attempting business again. The ingredients of my life made a tiramisu, but yours could be an apple pie. Whatever it is, it will all turn out sweet in the end. Thank you.